Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we left off on verse 11, and we're coming up to the 5 constituents of action, which actually enable us to determine what is our spiritual status. So you don't need to tell anybody what your spiritual status is, but it's a good guideline for oneself to assess what you need to up and evolve through in order to raise yourself. So in 7, just recapping, in 7 he was talking about tamasic Tyaga. So Tyaga born out of relinquishment of when you're ignorant, when you're not thinking, when you don't know what it is, you just give something up, or you actually don't even take up the bigger value. So by default, you renounce. You've given up what you should be doing or starting even. And in terms of, so he's not even come to the fruition of doing something bigger. It's not entered the remit. But in terms of a Rajasic Tyaga, a person who relinquishes Rajasic, that one with frenzied activity, looking at what they can get out of it, the likelihood is that they'll give up the activity when there's trouble, when it's difficult, when it's painful. They decide not to go on board with even what they might think is what you should be doing, but it becomes painful. So they drop it in that struggle. And as soon as that pain or trouble or difficulty goes away, they pick up that action again. All the time it's with that want of the result. What can I get out of it? So the sattvic Tyaga is what we want to pursue, is that which evolves us spiritually. It is one where you're performing karyam karma. You're doing your obligatory duty. Karyam, you're doing karma, that action, which is supposed to be done. You relinquish the past and the future. You don't get involved in that attachment from the past or that result orientation of the phalam, the fruit of action. So you understand that it diminishes your activity. It saps your energy. So in 10, he's talked about this idea of Medha Sakti, Medhavi, one who has that memory, doesn't mean literal memory, but that perception of the past and link it to the future. So what you're to do in a bigger value. So the eye isn't on the fruit or the past anxiety, so no sangam or phalam, but it's actually on the present, and it's got a capacity, medha, that memory, that capacity to flash back. It's like an intuition, a perception of, you know what you've got to do. So there's a purity in that. You've cut asunder that attachment. So when you cut the past, it doesn't mean you drop everything of the past. It actually means you take what you need to use to go forward, but you leave the attachment which is diminishing you in any relationship or any action. And it's not that you don't have a goal when it's talking about relinquishing the fruit. It's that you have a goal or a vision, an ideal, but you don't hook yourself onto that goal, vision, or idea when you're acting in your action with that perception, that meda. So it sounds pretty straightforward when we just look at the formula, but we don't tend to do that. If you actually think about how many times do you actually put your actions to what your obligations are. You know, that's the most difficult part of it. What are you obliged to do in your path to maneuver yourself to evolve? That's where it falls down, and there's a reason for it. As well you might already know, since we've gone to chapter 18. So there's a reason for that, as it were. Before we go ahead, is there any question from last week or anything like that? We can go to 11 otherwise.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
I know one of the last verses that we studied last week was about likes and dislikes. And I think it was indicating that such a person who has a sattvic relinquishment or Tyaga, um, they they go beyond the likes and dislikes. So I wondered how we can make that more practical for ourselves in our own lives. How do we know what our likes and dislikes are so that we don't get entangled by them?
Okay, so first you have to examine your nature, your swadharmic nature, if you don't know that. So you're not, you have a fair idea what you're supposed to be doing, or what your vocation is, or what your tendencies are. So having known that, you're then and you do that over time. You've got to check what are my tendencies, maybe over a month or two. You check every day, what am I inclined to do? What do I draw, what my thoughts are drawn towards? Then what's the next thing? Who can tell me what the next thing would be, rather than me just say it? How can you help yourself? What do you need to do? It's easy enough for me to say it, but what do you think? Anyone? Isha?
Be sure of your direction, your goal.
So be sure. So if you're to be sure of your direction goal, you need to set some goal.
And have constant reminders, however they may be, whatever practice you use, to constantly bring that to the forefront of your mind.
How are you going to do that?
Practice. Yeah.
What are you going to practice?
Yeah.
It's okay. You're good. It's good. So you assess your tendencies, set an ideal, a goal, something beyond your self-interest. If you're on a spiritual path, it'll be a bigger ideal, something that you're obliged to do on your path. Then, you see, it's not that you shouldn't do things that you don't like, and it's not that you should avoid everything. You know, you'd avoid the things that you like and do the things that you don't like. It's not like that. It's an assessment. But if you have a goal, everything that you're doing, you channelize towards that goal, that tapaha in your yajna. So you've got to have a goal to perform that yajna. So that keeps your focus off that dissipation. It won't happen immediately. It takes practice. You have to keep doing it. Your mind suddenly goes off. You like something. It's actually coming in this verse coming, 11. You like something. Mind goes off. You've got to bring it back to your ideal. That takes a consistency of purpose. So that means you've got to have an ideal. Then you work it backwards. It also takes, you don't kick yourself when you go off into likes and dislikes, so what? But you bring your mind back to where you want to go. Isha, you had something.
Yeah, just a question leading off from that. So when we're doing that, if we find it difficult because we're going against the norms of society, so the society we're living in, I think I asked you something similar to this a few weeks ago, but it's also been on my mind recently that when we're doing this, our lifestyle, how we are perceived by others around, we lead a different life. And if we struggle with that, with the labels we're given or how to explain ourselves, I don't know, is there any advice you have when we it's not always, but when we have those difficulties, when we find it challenging because we are leading basically a different life to others, so we're not doing the norms of society that they expect?
So, first of all, you're following, society will always give you some label or not when you're doing something different. So it's there for you to grow your capacity of intellect of why you're doing what you're doing. That would be, you've got to strengthen that. That keeps you off your likes and dislikes in the sense that it keeps you on your obligation. When your mind's weak and it's not yet established, your intellect's not established in something bigger, it's easy to be swayed by the whims and fancies of what society wants you to be doing rather than what you ought to be doing. And sometimes it will fit in with society and sometimes it won't. But when you're on a spiritual path, you've got to assess what you ought to be doing. And that comes by consistent study, reflection, introspection on the higher values of life. You have a focus, you channelize your energies to something bigger. If you're affected by what others are saying, which is invariably, there will be weak spots in different places. It just means you need to build your intellect, that capacity of where you're heading, that conviction. Just means that your conviction is a little bit wavery. So you've got to check your conscience a little bit more of what you're supposed to be doing. If it falls in line with the whole, go with it. That's great. Nobody will criticize you. If it doesn't, you still have to go with it because you're not going to be satisfied until you go with what your conscience tells you to do. And you know what? Somebody is bothering you, keep shut in front of that person. Just listen.
I mean, it's also
Not
environmental because, you know, in the East, for example, depending on your association, it can be that much easier. But in the West, yeah, it can be difficult. But yeah,
essentially, in where there's more of a Rajasic society, it's more tricky. The whole globe is Rajasic. We're raising our perception, our consciousness to something more sattvic, which isn't the norm of society. It's not the norm of society to put back. It's the norm of society, unfortunately, to grab out. So you have to actually, in this personality chart that we're doing, or this set of constituents to action, it's giving you sattvic, rajasic, tamasic tendencies. So you have to check inside yourself, do I want to be that or do I want to be this? I might be tamasic in this right now. How am I going to get myself out of it? So your dependency on your society, to the extent that you are dependent and affected by your society, is to the extent of your lack of spiritual development. To the extent that you become independent from the whims and fancies of society, and you can actually serve society if you want. If you might, perhaps it will be ought rather than want. Is you're independent, you're not affected because you're above the rajas of it, but you've got to strive within that. So this is a perfect set of a system here of sattva, rajas and tamas to keep checking yourself. Oh, I tripped up that way because I enabled this. But the best golden rule is keep quiet. Keep quiet. Who cares if you want to think that? It's your prerogative to think something of me or something of that. Make yourself strong internally. And you'll be able to serve society rather than be affected or a victim of society. So that's the strength of spiritual evolution. And it's never saying that you should or shouldn't do. It's totally with your conscience and conviction. Those two together don't normally falter in any way in terms of relating back in your world. So anybody that might say from a very, what's the word? From a very low point of view, many people say, boy, what you're doing is self-centered, self-interested, because they can't see that bigger picture because their interest is that way. So when you pitch up something bigger and evolve yourself, you'll be actually, without a doubt, you can't help but be of service to society. It's default, but you don't have to get affected by it. That takes a strength of conviction in line with your conscience. Let's go. 11. Everybody okay? Sam, so you're actually an ideal, channelizing your energies towards that ideal, assessing your obligation, assessing your swadharmic nature, so you're not going off your obligation, assessing your environment with what you need to do, what you're obliged to do. So, let's go. Guru.
Aruji, for the last session, I had one question regarding the obligatory duties. It does talk about a Tyagi conducting the obligatory duties without having that sense of attachment. But I'm not able to comprehend what could be the obligatory duty in our day-to-day life. Is it not something that we choose as well today? Maybe the kind of job that we do, the kind of friends that we have, the relations that we grow, are they not our own will? Are they really obligatory?
So from the spiritual perspective, there's only one obligation, and that's to reach the self. Nothing else. Your existence on this planet, as it were, your existence is just to get out and reach the self. Nothing else. So along the path, you have certain tendencies, certain vasanas. So you're projected, born in certain environments, conditions, which are suited best to allow you to express those tendencies, to evolve out of it. So what's obligatory and what's not obligatory will be individual to each person. It's not, your obligations are not the same as mine. Although nevertheless, there'll be some similarity because we're both in this classroom in some form or another. So remember, there was two types of obligation. So nitya karma and naimitya karma. There's two types, occasional duties and routine duties. You make those, and as you pitch up bigger values, your obligations will change. So they'll change where they encompass a bigger, more universal perspective. They won't stay to I and my. We have obligations to get up in the morning, clean ourselves, you know, have something to eat, to fuel us, to do whatever. All those are our obligations to our family, obligations to our community, obligations to not litter the streets, you know, as simple as that. Where there's no obligation, you see what the mess is. So we have certain inbuilt general routine obligations. We have obligations which are occasional. Maybe you have to do something on one time particular. To remember, it could be anything, without going into detail. But what you choose as your obligation in terms of whether it's mundane or whether it's spiritual will depend upon where your focus is. And if we start with the idea that our obligation is to get to the self, everything you do eventually in your yajna, tapaha, dana, in your how you channelize your energies to something bigger, how you serve, how you offer back, how you perform your activities, how you raise yourself from that tamas to sattva. If you're on that goal to get to the truth, the self, or your reason of your existence, all your obligations will be channeled in that direction, and you'll drop things which no longer are of purpose to you when you have something bigger in view. So you suddenly don't drop your family because you're on a spiritual path, but you may well have a different perspective on your relationship to your family when you're on the spiritual path. It's not about I and my, or what can I, you know, get out of everything just for my family. The perspective broadens as you serve a bigger cause. Also, your family gets taken care of, or the environment you're in gets taken care of. Certain things get taken care of. You can only do that when it's selfless and selfish and selfless. If you've got any interest, it won't happen. This is what it's trying to get us to reflect on, Tyagi. So what are your obligations? This is a whole big question, which you can start by there. Start by my obligation is get to the self. Okay, it's to self-development. It's not the self, if that's too lofty a goal. Okay, in my community, how can I serve? Okay, my society. So you start in my family. And instead of just thinking of myself, how do I serve my family? And then you broaden that. So those are the sort of parameters you're extending. If you just serve yourself as your obligation, it decays. So the smaller the circle, the more that will diminish and decay. So you've got to keep pitching up your obligations. My obligation is to keep the environment that I'm in with damage limitation. What I need to take, I take, but don't take more. Be frugal. It's like that's the sort of, how do you live in harmony with your world? Yeah. So we can pitch up different obligations. This, just I'm giving you a few examples. My obligation is to be clean and neat and presentable so the person next to me doesn't have to put up with me. It's as simple as that. My obligation is to nourish my body, to eat properly, to respect, so that I'm able to do for others. My obligation is to refine my emotions. I'm not thinking gross things so I can live with humanity or my family. So this is what we're... So you have to check, make a list in the morning. What do you think you're obliged to do? What takes you off in your likes and dislikes off your obligation? How do you bring it back? What's your ideal in place? So you naturally drop the lower value. 11. It's okay? 11. we chant 11. Vidya. 11.
नाहि देहवृथा सख्यं त्यक्तुं कर्मण शेषतः यस्तु कर्मफलत्यागी स त्यागी इति अभिधीयते.
Dharma, if you could read the...
Verily, it is not possible for the embodied to relinquish actions totally, but he who relinquishes fruit of action is called a tyagi.
So when he's talking, so he says, verily, it's not possible for the embodied to relinquish actions totally. So in a state of tamas, you don't do anything, but that's not what he's talking about. So here, when he talks about the embodies, he means the individual. It's not possible for any one of us to renounce action. Why does he say that? Anyone? Why can you get up? You know, I've got one person I've known for years and years. The minute the sun comes out, doesn't matter where he is in the world, whether he be in his workplace or his home place or whatever, is always trying. Sun comes out, and escape anything that he has to do. Takes his clothes off to a minimum, sits in the sun. Doesn't matter what work is coming, he'll avoid it. He'll have fires and fires sometimes in the middle of the park or wherever it sits in the sun. He's not Indian, by the way. I can make that joke. So, always trying to escape from action. But after a certain time, he has to get back to action. There's no choice. Happy or sad about it. What's the reason? I can't just sit there all day. Why can't I just do nothing? If somebody sets you on a holiday on the beach for a week or a month, I don't know, maybe a day, and you're to do nothing, what happens to you after a little while? One hopes. Can you just sit there, lie flat? What happens? Sure.
You get a little bit restless because you need something to do. Your body, we live in our bodies, so our bodies need something to do, and our mind.
Okay. And why is that? Why can't we renounce action? Because we're prepared to act because we have vasanas. We can't sit still. We have vasanas. We can sit still when we can be quiet with ourselves when we've refined our vasanas because we're able to. In actual fact, you can't sit and look at this type of knowledge unless you've reduced some sort of volume of vasanas. You can't look at this type of knowledge and think unless this vasanas have reduced to some degree. But because we have vasanas, you're propelled to act. So it's not possible for the individual to totally relinquish action just drop it, not be engaged with it. Because we have vasanas, we have tendencies that propel us to act, that need to be fulfilled. And until we've refined that or dropped them, that chronology of action will keep going on. So it goes vasana, from a vasana, an unmanifest thought, your inherent nature, vasana, comes the thought of what you are aspiring to do within you. And from that thought, it cultivates a desire. And from that desire, there's a great push into action. And until there's no vasanas, that keeps happening. So whatever it may be, if you've got vasanas for sport, you'll be doing sport. Vasanas for art, you'll be doing art. Music, business, law, whatever it may be, you'll be propelled to do it to the extent that you have it. So all he's saying here, the embodied, that one who's got vasanas, can't just do nothing. So what can they do in order to improve the quality of their action? So if you can't not act, drop the fruit, the craving for result. It might have sounded like you've heard this quite a lot in the last few verses and generally. But the magnitude of this idea of drop the fruit of action, you have to examine individually in your everyday. Are you, when you act, are you acting because you want that result or just because of the sake of it? In everything you do. And just to emphasize, it does not mean you drop the action per se. It does not mean whatever you have to do in your service, that you make that slower or you drop it or you become complacent. No, it actually means you, because you're not interested in the result, you fuel yourself with the momentum and you're able to do it much better because you can focus on the present. So you're not obsessed with the result. That's what it means. So if you have to act in certain areas, don't be bothered with the result. That's one way you can rid your vasanas. When one works with the result, it spoils the activity. There's no joy. It gets limited. It gets full of anxiety or stress. There's the famous quote by Robert Browning from the Grammarian's funeral. It says that that low man goes adding one to one, his hundreds soon hit. That high man aiming for a million misses it. Just keep going without the result in focus. You have to question yourself, even when you're doing something which is noble, charitable, maybe grand. Drop the fruit of action. Just keep moving on what you've got to do. You get that consolidation, that understanding, that becomes a wisdom. You're not concerned with the work, you just do it. So after the long oration by Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, the last few lines of his oration when he's talking about his dear friend Julius Caesar, who's been assassinated, and he's given an opportunity to talk, to turn a mob which believes that Caesar was a tyrant. He changes the mob's thoughts slowly and gradually. But at the end 2 lines, he states, mischief thou art afoot. Now take thou what course thou wilt. Just do one's activities as you ought, Don't bother about the result. It will take its own course. That's what we need to just remember. But instead, what do we do? Anybody? What tends to happen?
We measure ourselves by the result.
We get involved in what are we going to get out of it. Remember, it doesn't say you don't set a goal or idea. It just says don't keep focused there. No prefix, no suffix. A liquidation of your ego. Let's read the verse.
The Sattvika Tyagi practices renunciation, as described in verses 9 and 10. But he does not relinquish action per se. He performs obligatory function in life. A Tyagi only controls his anxiety for acquiring and enjoying fruit of action. An embodied Dehabhat is one whose self is conditioned by his gross, subtle, and causal body. Causal body is vasanas, which constitute one's inherent nature. Subtle body consists of thought and desire, and gross body is physically containing the organs of perception and action. As long as the embodied possesses his vasanas, they helplessly manifest themselves as actions. Hence, it is not possible for him to relinquish action.
Mm-hmm. So as long as you got vasanas, you can't drop them unless you refine them so. This idea of the subtle body, mind and intellect, actually that your thoughts within, gives us in the spiritual path in terms of your evolution, the ability to make informed choices, make distinctions. So when you gain a knowledge, you can make a choice on something which is bigger or more pervasive with your subtle intellect. You can make a choice in line with something which is not, if you refine it, something which is leading you out of the terrestrial, focusing you on the transcendental, focusing you on something which is universal, out of the remit of change, out of the remit of opposites. So obligation, when you perform obligation, it's out of the remit whether you like it or not like it. Incidentally, you might like it, it'll help you. It makes it smoother, but you may also enable yourself to do things that you don't like because you understand that's what's got to be done. So it's always giving you a strength to get out of your likes and dislikes that change, to look at it objectively. The poet John Milton, he writes a sonnet on his blindness. He was a philosopher, Christian mystic, author, and towards the end of his life, he went blind. And he wrote, there's this short poem on his blindness. And he wrote in the end part, he also serves who stands and waits. So ours is to actually conceive whether he was putting forward, whether he's writing or not writing. He has that humility to understand there's a divinity that shapes our end. It was a tough time being, can you imagine you are a writer, you're a philosopher, then you're denied that expression. But there was an understanding. He did what he had to do, he wanted to do. There was also a time where he couldn't, but he had the humility to understand, project something bigger, beyond what he wanted to do, though that was also of service. So that humility, with talent or without talent, it's all about the liquidation of your individuality, your ego, which incidentally is helping you get there too, but you don't hang on to it. Then comes the wisdom. Let's go. 12.
अनिष्टं मिष्टं मिश्रं च त्रिविधं कर्मणः फलं भवति अत्यागिनां प्रेत्य न तु सन्न्यासिनां क्वचित्.
Guru, if you could read that verse.
Yeah. Verse 12. The threefold desirable, undesirable, and mixed fruit of action accrues to non-relinquishers, atyagi, but never to renunciate sannyasis.
So, those who are looking for fruit, I think we have understood that's not a tyagi, not a renunciate, one who's expecting the fruit of action. So there are three types of expectation out of action. You expect your actions, nishtam, to be agreeable, desirable. Then there's anishtam, when you put the a in front of the nishtam, undesirable, gives the opposite, disagreeable. And then there's an action which gives the result where it's a bit of both, mixed. So he who gets this fruit, who has that expectation, is atyagi, not a tyagi in fact. A tyagi is not bothered about the result, the fruit of action. A tyagi is concerned about one of those three. And the effect of a tyagi, one who relinquishes, that effect is a sannyas, who's not actually affected by the result. Otherwise, all the time, the opposite is you're bothered about the result. So the grandeur of any work is when you're not concerned with the result. It's an introverted person. Just an introverted person is not quiet, somebody quiet in a corner. It's actually mentally within themselves, calm, poised, objective, just does his part and gets on with it, not constantly worried, not wanting somebody else to do the work to get the result, just gets on with it. When you do the perfect action, why on earth would you be bothered about the result? You don't get bothered about it. Things can go up or down, go your way, not quite your way. May not turn out as you like, but when you've put in the optimum, it really doesn't matter. You're not concerned. That's the beauty of right action. They're not really bothered about the result. You do your part, you get out. You look at your conscience, what you have to do, you do the right thing by it. So it's the quality, not the quantity of what you're doing that matters. You bid your own conscience, not concerned with the result, not concerned whether it's desirable. If it's desirable, you enjoy it. It's not that you deny it. If it's not desirable, you understand it. Still move. If it's a bit of both, you just take it for what it is. You can do that when you've got it clear what you've got to be doing. You're clear with your path of action, your obligation. You're not bothered about the effects. Sometimes you may get a knock, sometimes a knock or shock, sometimes it may be very pleasant. You just be in it. Could be positive, negative, you're okay with it. You have to see yourself as though you're in a movie. When you watch a movie, you may watch a tragedy or a play or something. You go away from the play if you're watching a tragedy thinking, oh, what a great tragedy that was. Amazing how it all happened. And then you watch a movie which is quite cheery, you go, oh, that was really uplifting. On both accounts, once you've left, you don't get stuck with the movie. You don't get upset by it. But yet, on both accounts, you take it, you enjoy it, you're objective to it, and you move on. So here, the expectation of action as such is of Tyagi, a non-relinquisher. They expect, and certain results will come about. A Tyagi doesn't have that expectation, just does karyam karma. If you're interested in the result, you cultivate more vasanas. If you cultivate more vasanas, you go deeper and deeper into your perceptions, emotions, and thoughts, and you get lost in that quagmire of the knocks and shocks of life. Hence the emphasis of drop the result, drop the fruit. It's the starting point of your spiritual pursuit. Let's read it.
The verse uses the words Tyagi and Sanyassi. Tyagi has been defined as relinquisher of fruit of action. Tyagi is one who does not relinquish fruit. And Sanyasi, one who has renounced desire-ridden action. A Sanyasi therefore has advanced further than a Tyagi. As a Tyagi practices relinquishment of fruit of his action, he drops his vasanas, desires, becomes relatively free from desire, rises to the state of sannyasa, a state beyond desire-ridden action.
So just one point he's pointing out, sannyas, tyag, slight thought, just something to think on. Tyag may have you may have desire, a lot of compulsion, desires that you want to do. So, but you can't quite control that. So you have to do those actions. You just cut the result. At least start that way. A sannyasi actually doesn't have that same state of, there's a dispassion there, but they know what they've got to do. Leftover desires. So there's not that pang or craving, maybe as in the Tyagi is. There's not that feeling when there's a lot of desires there. When in a sannyasi's case, there's not that bulk of desires pushing. It's something more refined. So it's more objective. But nevertheless, there's actions that have got to be performed. It's a different stage. So it's a progression. Let's continue.
3 types of result accrue from desire-ridden action. Ishtam, agreeable, Anishtam, disagreeable, and Mishram, mixed. Action prompted by good desire produces good result. Bad desire produces bad result. Mediocre desire, mediocre result. Atyagi, non-relinquisher, functions with desire. His action produces fruit, a result, vasana, according to the nature of desire prompting it. Not so in a sannyasi with a high ideal, whose spiritual goal is fixed. Mundane desires do not pollute his action. His intellect, rather than his mind's desire, guides him in the spiritual path. He exhausts his desires, vasanas, to gain enlightenment.
It's clearly put there. So the beginning path, you might have lots of desires all over the place. As you move on, it only becomes for spiritual evolution to get to the self. So in terms of, Sam, you were mentioning in terms of your likes and dislikes, you may have a lot of likes and dislikes when the goal's not clear. When the goal is clear, lots of things drop away, and you can actually dictate what you want to pitch up. You don't go by whims and fancies so easily. It's clearer. So the conviction is there in line with your conscience. There's a knowledge of where you're heading. You're fortifying that knowledge all the time, making it yours, that wisdom. You're constantly working on that. Let's go. Guru.
Need a little bit of understanding here. So it says the very purpose of action is because of vasana, the desires. So can there really be a state which says, a state beyond desire-ridden action? Because somewhere I understood that the action, the very existence of action is because of desire. So can there be a state beyond desire, a state of action beyond desire?
Yes. So we call it, to beg that question, we say that's desirelessness, actionlessness. So it's when you may have very few desires, you've refined your thoughts. So you have very few desires being projected, because you've pitched up on something bigger, they're all heading in a direction. So you're objective. But nevertheless, you have to do certain things because you're in this embodiment. You can't do nothing. The mind's still operating, as it were. Thoughts are still there. So the quality of those thoughts and desires are only to be channelized to get to that self. So nothing else is of interest, but yet you've got to do what you've got to do every day. But your thoughts pitched up there. And the more you refine your thoughts, your action will have more potency in how pervasive it is, whatever you execute. So you'll have to do less in terms of how it impacts in the world. It's like if you look at it from a point of view of in the workforce, if you've got all the laborers, they be doing 10 to the dozen activities, whereas a manager gives one instruction, which actually gets everybody else to work. So it's one thought compared to a lot of thick collective thoughts to get the activities done. So as you refine your thoughts, it becomes more objective, so more poignant. The idea is to refine it so it's not desire-ridden, not backed by your own interest. Desire-ridden activities are backed by your own self-interest. Slowly you cultivate that from being self-interest to unselfish, serving your environment. And you broaden that till you're serving a universal purpose. So till the thought is only for the self, which is all pervasive. So you're displacing the desires. So you're finding it. So you'll have less of an interest in the mundane things. You're not interested. You may have to participate in some things. You do it because only to serve the higher. where you think it's of no use, you won't enter into those arenas. And you won't waste your time. So the desires get refined until it's desirelessness. There's no desires there. Yet from the perspective of an onlooker, you're acting perhaps, a realized person may be acting in whatever the strongest prarabdha is. But there's no desire there. It's like a car switched off, the velocity's still going, the speed's still going, but there's no acceleration. There's no desire push. It's not desire. And thus, in this paragraph, it's sort of showing you that the sannyasi doesn't have that desire, but they just doing till it dies to the end. But there's no craving for the result. There's no push of attachment from behind. Just doing till the body comes to zero. Tim, is that okay? Makes sense to you? Guru, it's okay? Tim.
From an external point of view, could a sannyasi be viewed as someone deeply tamasic?
No, only from a tamasic person's point of view or a rajasic person's point of view. Yeah, they could be, but it won't be. They'll be acting very acutely. See, you might criticize the manager for doing nothing, but their one action, from the point of view of if you're under them, their one action is pervasive, but you don't understand what that pervasiveness is. It's like seeing a propeller in an aeroplane. If you see if you've ever seen the propeller in the aeroplane, how huge it is, when it's going round, you actually don't see it moving, but it's moving at incredible speeds. You don't want to put your finger inside that propeller or yourself anywhere near it, because it is gonna rip you to shreds. Its speed is such. So when you understand it, you won't think that. When there's no knowledge of it, perhaps. But they are not tamasic. That's the whole point. They might be looked as tamasic, but there are telltale signs even in the physical and mental that could appear tamasic, and that's what it is. See, that's the problem with this whole value of spiritual evolution. People think that you don't have to do anything. You sit there and meditate, but if you've got a lot of vasanas and desires, you cannot sit and do. You're not in that position. You can't even sit quietly and read the scriptures until your mind's calm. So when you gain this sort of knowledge, it builds a momentum. And it's not necessary that momentum will be seen by all, and it's not your business to actually want their approval. That you yourself know, is it tamasic, rajasic, sattvic? Just by us looking at this part of the Bhagavad Gita, we'll unravel it very quickly. What are we up to? Never mind what anybody else is up to. But yeah, it's pretty obvious if you're a sannyasi, if you want to take that name on yourself, and you're huge and you're not doing exercise, and you're lethargic and you don't think of anything, well, some things you might ask a few questions. If it's complacent, if you've got that complacency. See, it's physical, mental, intellectual refinement, spiritual, encompasses all of that. So there are some things which go out of sync, but you won't be complacent. Doesn't mean to say everybody will recognize what it is. But I would select. It's not for anybody to, it's not for you to look at anybody else. It's for you to discover yourself. Keep it there. Hari Om.
Thank you.